What are placebos and what is the placebo effect? And what are the ways that it is most effective?
So placebos are like sugar pills that someone gets as part of a clinical trial, for example. They think it might be a real drug, let's say for a headache. They take this sugar pill, and because they believe their headache is going to go away, the headache will actually go away. So the biggest studies that we've done, mega studies with tens of thousands of people, show that most over-the-counter painkillers do not work any better than placebos for most chronic pain. So placebos work basically by doing two things. One thing is they reduce someone's stress. If someone is stressed out and worried about something, they're more likely to have pain. When you're stressed out, your pain receptors are more sensitive. So your back pain, any chronic pain will increase. Depression's enhanced. But if some doctor you trust gives you a pill, even if it's a sugar pill, but as long as you think it might be something more powerful, that can reduce stress. And just as increased stress causes all kinds of diseases, we can go into that later if you want, reduced stress is the antidote, can reduce the risk of all those diseases.
And Jeremy, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to stay in line with that particular point you're making. Can a placebo work even if I know I'm taking a placebo?
That's the funny thing. Two cool guys in Baltimore in 1964 published a study where they took people who were anxious and a bit paranoid, gave them placebos like sugar pills, and told them this is just a placebo, and it still worked. But the really funny thing is that these guys, because they were a bit paranoid already, they thought the doctors were lying. So they thought the doctors were giving them a real pill. But since then, I've done what's called a systematic review of randomized trials, which is a fancy name for basically the least biased evidence we can find, where we compared what happens to people when they get placebos that they know are placebos. So doctors say, this is a placebo, like a sugar pill, but it might help someone like you. So we found that these so-called open label or honest placebos can have an effect as well, almost as strong as the placebos people think are think are the real thing, so that's called deceptive placebos. And the reason these open label or honest placebos work is that we have a subconscious reaction. Just like somebody might have a phobia of spiders, they might study and know that this daddy long leg is not a poisonous spider, but their subconscious causes their body to react in a certain way. In the same way, an open label placebo, when a trusted doctor says this might help you, then even if you know it's a sugar pill, in your mind, your body reacts in such a way that activates your body's self-healing properties. And as you mentioned, we all have amazing bodies with amazing healing powers. And
that's it. Jeremy, I find that so bizarre, to be honest. I think it's fascinating. I think it's important. For me, it just feels like a psychological trick, But let's go into that a bit. And I've heard, this a bit about you when I did research into you, is that, can you explain the placebo effect as it being a combination of a mind-body coordination? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's one thing that even I make the mistake. I talk about mind and body. I talk about psychological or physiological. In fact, there's nothing that's just psychological. Nothing is just in your mind. And to prove it, I've got a simple proof. Try to name something to me that's just psychological. You might say, well, my thoughts or my dreams, but those dreams and thoughts can be, if someone has a brain scan hooked up to you, they can see those thoughts and they can see those dreams, not precisely in the same detail you see them, but they can see where the brain is being activated. So nothing is purely psychological at all. And then almost nothing is purely physical. If someone has a physical ailment, they can feel depressed and upset about it. So psychological, physiological is all tied, intertwined together. So that's why people say it's just psychological. It's never just psychological.
No.
It's both psychological and physiological. The third thing to add is that because of this connection between physiology and psychology, mind and body, you can do things to yourself, like words and certain actions that can influence your entire body.
Sure. Is that why mantras, and in some cultures, mantras and certain prayers are imperative to just good state of well-being and keeping, and that having a beneficial effect on your immune system and whatnot? Like, yeah, I mean, I know, especially in certain Hindu cultures or Tibetan cultures, that those mantras and those prayers daily just, completely make them feel alive and not have to worry about things. Is this something related in that sort of sense?
Yes, there are actually, it's called the relaxation response.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there's 100 or 1,000 different ways to induce this relaxation response, which is the antidote to the stress response. And one of them absolutely is prayers, mantras. It can also be purely relaxing your muscles consciously. If you want, I can tell you about the history of that, how it was discovered with the Beatles. You heard the story before?
Yeah, going to India.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was on the inclination of George Harrison or who, but they met the, I can never pronounce the name right, I'm sorry.
The Maharishi Yogi.
Thank you. Yes. And I guess Sergeant Pepper stemmed from that visit, right?
I think so, yeah. And in parallel with their visit there, they became very popular.
Right.
That same year, 1968, a guy called Professor Herbert Benson from Harvard University was doing some studies with drugs on monkeys to lower their blood pressure. And some of these meditators went to Professor Benson and said, listen, we can lower our blood pressure with no drugs. Benson thought they were nuts, but he sent them away. So he sent them away. They were very persistent. They returned. Benson finally agreed to do an experiment, but he had one condition. He said, as long as the Maharishi Yogi himself signs up to the study, that way when I show it doesn't work, I'll expose him as a charlatan.
Yeah, right.
But the Maharishi signed up right away. He said, oh, finally I get Harvard University to back up my technique. And of course, eventually it showed that meditation lowers blood pressure. And then Benson was faced with this problem. Well, if I start promoting the Maharishi Yogi's technique, my colleagues at Harvard, other serious places, will think that I went nuts or I was smoking too much dope with the Beatles. So he thought of what he called a scientific name, which is the relaxation response. And he wasn't entirely wrong, because it's not just the Maharishi Yogi's technique that can induce this inner state of optimal healing. It's also other forms of meditation, prayer, mantras, and many other things.
Well, and that's interesting. Oh, go ahead, Jeremy. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They're all different, but they share a common substrate of evoking this relaxation response.
Exactly. Look, and this is going to sound a little bizarre maybe. When I think of my grandma, who was a devout Catholic, she's not with us anymore, but when she would pray, she would induce some sort of just happiness inside of her. When I think of my friends who live in India and who practice, certain mantras and prayers, whatever's related to that according to the religion. When I think of my friends who live in Saudi Arabia, when I think of certain friends in Japan, like these are friends I have, and they all do their own version of something, and they all feel, like you said, it's that thread that keeps that seems to be, I don't know how much we go into quantum mechanics or whatnot, but there seems to be a thread of vibration that really makes the body feel good, makes the immune system strong, and especially in some of these cultures, especially the people I know in India and like here in Mexico, like people who live in like indigenous regions, like in the Chiapas and Oaxaca, they don't take any pharmaceuticals. Okay, like they say they don't need it. So like they seem to live a very long time. Okay, but I don't know if that has to do with because they are devout in their prayers and keeping these, and devout in these mantras and keeping a sense of, let's say, elevating their system inside, their innerness, which you speak a lot about as well in Dr. U, right? To really keep them healthy. Is there something to that?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I'm not against the drugs and pharmaceuticals. I'm against too much of it, because we take too much of it. Just like I might have like a beer on a Friday afternoon after work or in the evening, but one is okay, or two, but 10 or 20 is going to be bad for me. We're doing the same thing now with pharmaceutical drugs and interventions as taking 10 or 20. So for example, medical harm caused by drugs, so medication side effects are the third leading cause of death in the US, and it's not that different elsewhere. That's nuts. And our bodies, meanwhile, are able to heal. These people who don't take any drugs, I mean, that's wonderful. Most of us might want to take just fewer, a lot less than we do actually take.
Like a balance, maybe, depending on your situation, obviously, right?
We've lost the sense of balance. The average person over 65 in the US, Canada, I'm sure it's the same among certain groups in Mexico, take a minimum of 5 prescription drugs a day, many taking 20. Their lives a nonstop ritual of popping pills, managing side effects, trying to remember what pill to take when one of the problems might be dementia. So we've lost this kind of our sense that we have this inner power that can heal the vast majority of things that people currently visit their family doctors for.